Hello, my dear viewers. Today will be a very interesting story. I recommend watching the video to the end. Put a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and be sure to write comments on what you liked or did not like, and if you have an interesting criminal story from your life. Write your story in the comments and I will make a video and tell your story here on the channel. Okay, I have detained you. I wish you a good mood and viewing. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Peterson, and a year ago my life was perfect, or at least I thought it was. I had a husband, a house, and a steady job. But everything changed in a single day, and now I'm telling my story in the hope that it might serve as a warning to others. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was making coffee when the doorbell rang. Standing there was a man in a suit, holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as a representative from a financial institution I didn't recognize. "I'm here regarding the overdue balance," he said. Confused, I asked, "What balance?" He glanced at his clipboard. "The loan your husband, Eric Peterson, took out 6 months ago. The payments have stopped, and as the co-signer, you're now responsible for the remaining balance." The words hit me like a truck. "Loan? What loan?" He handed me a stack of papers. There, clear as day, was my name next to Eric's on a loan for $200,000. My signature was on the document, but I knew I had never signed it. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. "This must be a mistake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But the man shook his head. "I'm sorry, Mom, but this is a legally binding agreement. You might want to speak to your husband about it." That was the moment I realized something was very, very wrong. I tried calling Eric immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I texted him over and over, growing more frantic with each unanswered message. By the afternoon, I knew I couldn't wait for him to respond. I drove to the office where he worked, only to be told that he'd quit 2 weeks ago. The woman at the front desk said he mentioned moving out of state, but didn't leave any forwarding information. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Eric wasn't just avoiding me, he was gone. That evening, I searched through the house, desperate for clues. In his desk drawer, I found a stack of unopened letters from the bank. He must have been hiding them from me for months. There was also a receipt for a storage unit rented under his name. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed up, poring over every detail, every clue. Why would Eric do this to me, and where had he gone? The next morning, I decided to confront someone who might have answers. Eric's sister, Melissa. We'd never been close. She'd always been distant, almost cold, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't like me. But Eric had trusted her, and I hoped she could point me in the right direction. Melissa lived in a small townhouse on the other side of town. When she opened the door, her expression flickered with something I couldn't place: surprise, annoyance. "Natalie," she said, her tone clipped, "what are you doing here?" "I need to find Eric," I said, holding up one of the loan documents. "He's taken out a loan in my name, and now he's disappeared." Melissa's face remained unreadable. "I haven't seen Eric in weeks." "You're lying," I snapped. "You must know something." "Please, Melissa, I'm drowning here." She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Even if I did know, why would I tell you? You've always been so naive, Natalie. Maybe it's time you face reality." "Eric's not coming back." Her words cut deeper than I expected, and something in her tone made my skin crawl. It wasn't just indifference, it was almost like she was enjoying this. "You knew, didn't you?" I accused. "You knew about the loan. You knew he was going to run." Melissa smirked but said nothing. She stepped back into the house and shut the door in my face. As I stood there, rage and despair twisting inside me, I realized that Melissa wasn't just unhelpful, she was part of the problem. And if I wanted answers, I'd have to find them on my own. I stood on Melissa's doorstep for a long moment after she slammed the door. My fists clenched at my sides, and 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. She knew something. Her smirk had told me that much, but I couldn't force her to talk. Not yet. As I drove home, my mind replayed every interaction I'd ever had with Melissa. The cryptic comments she'd made about Eric being too clever for his own good, the times she'd laughed off questions about his past. I'd brushed it all aside back then, thinking she was just being difficult. But now, it felt like I'd missed all the warning signs. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of me. Every signature, every transaction felt like a betrayal. I hadn't just been Eric's wife, I'd been his mark. I remembered the storage unit receipt I'd found in his desk drawer and decided to check it out the next morning. Sleep was out of the question, so I spent the rest of the night researching the loan. The company that had issued it wasn't one of the big banks. It was a private lender with limited online information. What little I found painted a grim picture: high interest rates, aggressive collection practices, and ties to shady business dealings. The pit in my stomach grew deeper. If Eric had involved himself with people like this, he wasn't just a runaway, he was in serious trouble. The storage facility was a few miles outside of town, tucked behind a gas station. It was the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. Rows of identical metal doors stretched out in every direction, and the office was staffed by a bored-looking teenager scrolling on his phone. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need access to Unit 312. It's under Eric Peterson's name." The teenager barely looked up. "You got ID?" I handed over my driver's license, praying that Eric hadn't put some kind of lock on the account. After a painfully long moment, the boy nodded. "You're on the approved list. Here's the key." My hands shook as I walked to the unit. The air was cold despite the sunny day, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. When I unlocked the door, the metal creaked loudly, echoing in the empty facility. Inside, the space was filled with boxes, most of them unlabeled. A faint smell of mildew hung in the air. I opened the first box and found a collection of receipts and invoices. Nothing unusual, except for the fact that many of them were from out-of-state hotels. The dates matched the months when Eric had supposedly been on business trips. The next box held photos of me. Some were from family gatherings, others were candid shots I didn't even know had been taken. One picture in particular made my blood run cold. It was from the day I signed the mortgage for our house. But instead of Eric standing beside me, there was a man I didn't recognize, his face partially obscured by sunglasses. Why would Eric have this, and who was the man? At the bottom of the box was a stack of papers. As I flipped through them, my heart sank. There were financial records, loans, bank transfers, and investments, all of them tied to my name. The last document was a note, scribbled in Eric's handwriting, "Meet Melissa." Final payment. I left the storage unit shaking, my mind a whirlwind of anger, fear, and confusion. The note was the final confirmation I needed. Melissa wasn't just complicit. She was helping him. That evening, I went back to her townhouse. This time, I wasn't going to leave without answers. When she opened the door, she looked annoyed but not surprised. "You again. What do you want now?" I shoved the note in her face. Explain this, I demanded. Melissa's eyes flicked to the paper, and for a split second I saw panic flash across her face. But then she recovered, crossing her arms with that same infuriating smirk. You should just let it go, Natalie. You're not going to find him. What did you do? I shouted, my voice echoing down the quiet street. Where is he? Her expression hardened. You don't understand, do you? Eric's not the man you think he is. He never was. He's been running cons like this for years. You're just the latest in a long line of women who fell for his charm. Her words hit me like a slap. You're lying, am I? She said, stepping closer. Think about it, Natalie. How much do you really know about him, his family? His past? The truth was, I didn't. Eric had always been evasive about his childhood, brushing off questions with jokes or vague answers. I'd chalked it up to bad memories, never imagining it was something more sinister. I want the truth, I said, my voice trembling. All of it. Melissa sighed, rubbing her temples as if I were the one causing her stress. Fine. Eric owed money to people you don't want to mess with. The loan was his way out, but he needed your name to pull it off. You were his ticket to freedom, Natalie. That's all you ever were. Her words felt like daggers, but I forced myself to stay focused. Where is he now? She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before leaning in. He's gone, and if you're smart, you'll stop looking. These people he owes. They don't care who pays as long as someone does. And right now, that someone is you. Melissa's words echoed in my mind long after I left her townhouse. If you're smart, you'll stop looking, but how could I stop? Eric had destroyed my life, left me drowning in debt, and then vanished without a trace. I couldn't just let him get away with it. I spent the night combing through the documents I'd taken from the storage unit, hoping to piece together his trail. The financial records hinted at a web of transactions that seemed to lead nowhere, as if Eric had deliberately created a labyrinth to cover his tracks. But then I found something, a bank statement showing a wire transfer to a name I didn't recognize, Harper Trading Co. A quick online search revealed that Harper Trading Co. was a small business located in Chicago. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. The next morning, I packed a bag and booked a flight to Chicago. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Lisa. I wasn't sure I could trust anyone anymore. The Harper Trading Co. building was an unassuming brick warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the air smelled of paper and ink, and a receptionist greeted me with a polite but curious smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for someone who might be connected to this company," I said, showing her a copy of the bank statement. Her smile faltered. "I'm sorry, we don't give out client information." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Please. My husband wired money here before disappearing. I need to know if you've seen him." The receptionist hesitated, her eyes flicking toward a door behind her. "Wait here," she said before disappearing into the back. A few minutes later, a man emerged. He was tall, with sharp features and an air of authority. "I'm Michael Harper," he said, extending a hand. "I understand you're looking for someone." I explained everything: Eric's disappearance, the loan, the storage unit. Michael listened intently, his expression unreadable. "I remember him," he said finally. "He came here a few months ago, trying to liquidate some assets. Claimed he was planning to move overseas." "Do you know where he went?" I asked, my heart pounding. Michael shook his head. He didn't say. But he mentioned a sister. Melissa, I think her name was. He said she was helping him sort things out. My blood ran cold. Melissa hadn't just been complicit, she'd been actively involved. I returned to my hotel room, anger simmering beneath the surface. Melissa had lied to my face, playing innocent while covering for Eric. I needed to confront her again, but this time I'd be prepared. The next day, I flew back home and went straight to Melissa's house. I didn't bother knocking. The door was unlocked, and I pushed it open to find her sitting in the living room, casually sipping coffee. "Well, if it isn't the detective," she said, smirking. "Got the act," I snapped, tossing the bank statement onto the coffee table. "I know you've been helping Eric. I spoke to someone in Chicago who confirmed it." For the first time, Melissa's confidence wavered. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice defensive. "Stop lying," I shouted. "I've seen the receipts, the transactions. You've been covering for him this whole time." Melissa sighed, setting her cup down. "Fine, you're right, I helped him. But do you really think you'll be able to track him down? He's long gone, Natalie. And if you keep poking around, you're going to get hurt." "What does that mean?" I demanded. She leaned back, crossing her arms. "The people Eric owes aren't just going to sit back and let you snoop around. You're putting a target on your back, and for what? Closure. Revenge. It won't bring your money back." Her words chilled me, but they only strengthened my resolve. "I don't care. I'm not stopping until I find him." A week later, I got an anonymous tip in the form of a text message. "Meet me at Riverwood Park, 10 p.m., come alone." The number wasn't familiar, but something told me it was connected to Eric. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. The park was deserted when I arrived, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp. I clutched my phone tightly, ready to call for help if things went south. A figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't Eric, it was Melissa. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I came to warn you," she said. "You've gone too far. Eric's not coming back, and the people he owes won't stop until they've collected. You need to disappear before it's too late." I shook my head. "I'm not running. I'm going to fix this." Melissa's expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." Before I could react, she lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. My phone skittered across the pavement. We struggled, her strength surprising me, but I managed to push her off and grab my phone. "Stay away from me," I shouted, backing away. Melissa stared at me, her face twisted with rage. "You don't understand what you're up against, Natalie. You think this is about you and Eric. It's bigger than that, and if you keep digging, you're going to regret it." She turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving me shaken and more determined than ever to uncover the truth. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos. Hello my dear viewers, I would like to thank you for watching the video, and I wanted to say subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be very grateful and you will not miss new videos. Enjoy the video. My name is Emily Carter. I've lived my entire life in a quiet corner of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At 32, I worked as a waitress in a dingy diner on the edge of town. My life was a cycle of long shifts, bad tips, and constant worrying about paying bills. The only excitement came from daydreams of escaping it all. But I never expected a dream like that to come true or to turn into a nightmare. It all started on a cloudy Thursday afternoon. I'd left work early because my manager, Stan, was unusually kind or just too hungover to care. I decided to take the long way home, cutting through the abandoned industrial district. It was risky, sure, but it shaved off 15 minutes. That's when I saw a battered duffel bag sitting in the middle of the road. I almost ignored it, but something about it caught my attention. Maybe it was the way it was perfectly zipped, or maybe I was just too curious for my own good. Either way, I stopped. The bag was heavier than I expected. I looked around, no cars, no people, just silence. My heart pounded as I unzipped it, and there it was, stacks and stacks of money, neatly bundled, unmarked bills. My hands trembled as I counted one bundle. $10,000. There had to be hundreds of them in there. $3 million. For a second, I felt like I was dreaming. My thoughts raced. Who does this belong to? Why is it here? Should I call the police? But then another thought crept in, louder than the rest. What if I keep it? I zipped the bag shut, hauled it over my shoulder, and practically ran home. My tiny apartment felt even smaller with that much cash inside it. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat staring at the bag. A voice in my head told me this money could change everything. No more struggling to pay rent, no more greasy diner shifts. I could finally be free, but as the excitement surged, so did the fear. Whoever left that money behind wouldn't just let it go. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend, Lisa. Hey, Em, drinks tonight? You deserve some fun. I almost laughed. Fun. I couldn't think about fun. I was sitting on a fortune that wasn't mine, and someone, somewhere, was probably looking for it. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining faceless men in suits knocking on my door, guns drawn. But I also pictured a new life, a life I'd always wanted. By morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going back to the diner. I wasn't going to struggle anymore. This money was mine now. But I had no idea how high the price would be. The first thing I did was quit my job. No notice, no explanation. I didn't care what Stan or my co-workers thought. For once, I wasn't worried about tomorrow. I rented a car cash, of course, and drove 3 hours out of Milwaukee to a small, no-name town. I checked into a cheap motel with the kind of anonymity I needed. Sitting on the scratchy motel bed, I spread the money out on the comforter, my fingers running over the crisp bills. It felt surreal. I couldn't spend it all at once. That would draw attention. So I started small. A new phone, better clothes, a decent haircut. I even splurged on a laptop to help me research how to invest without leaving a trail. But the paranoia was constant. Every shadow outside the motel window felt like someone watching. Every knock at the door made my stomach flip. I'd scan the news obsessively, looking for any mention of missing cash or unsolved crimes. Nothing came up. Then I made my first big move. I rented a cozy little house on the outskirts of Chicago under a fake name. The realtor didn't bat an eye when I handed over 6 months' rent in advance. For the first time in years, I felt free. I wasn't scraping by or worrying about bills. I spent my days shopping, eating at fancy restaurants, and imagining this was how life was meant to be. But things didn't stay perfect for long. It started with a phone call. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. The message was short and chilling. We know you have the money, Emily. You can't hide forever. My blood ran cold. How did they find me? I thought I'd been so careful. I changed my phone, moved cities, even used cash for everything. Panic set in. I packed a bag, grabbed the duffel, and drove out of town without a plan. I found another motel, this one even more rundown than the last, and holed up there. That night, I got another call. This time, I answered. "You're in over your head," a deep voice said. "That money doesn't belong to you." "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's not important. What matters is that you give it back. If you don't, things will get unpleasant." The call disconnected. My hands shook as I clutched the phone. The next morning, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street from the motel. It didn't move for hours. When I finally mustered the courage to leave, the driver's eyes followed me. They had found me. I realized then that the money wasn't a blessing, it was a curse. And I was in far deeper than I ever thought possible, but I wasn't giving up, not yet. This was my chance to change my life, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me. The SUV was still there when I returned to the motel that evening. The driver had sunglasses on, even though the sun was setting. He didn't try to approach me, but his presence spoke volumes. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made me jump. My heart raced every time I imagined them bursting through the door. By sunrise, I had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. I had to disappear again, this time for good. I drove to a big box store a few towns over, keeping an eye on my rearview mirror the entire way. Once inside, I bought supplies. Hair dye, a cheap burner phone, and a backpack to replace the duffel bag. I couldn't keep carrying that bag around. It was too obvious, too suspicious. I dyed my hair that night, turning my chestnut brown locks into a muted blonde. Staring at my reflection in the motel bathroom, I barely recognized myself. Good, that was the point. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. These people, whoever they were, had resources. They'd found me once, they'd find me again. The next day, I withdrew cash in small increments from a team scattered across 3 different cities, always keeping my head low and my eyes scanning the surroundings. By the time I finished, I had about $20,000 in smaller bills packed into my new backpack, the rest of the money. I couldn't risk carrying it all. I stuffed the duffel into a storage locker at a train station in Chicago and memorized the key's serial number before tossing it in a river. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe that would throw them off. Maybe I could finally catch my breath. I was wrong. Later that night, as I sat in a dingy diner trying to eat, a man slid into the booth across from me. He was tall, with a shaved head and a leather jacket that screamed trouble. "Emily," he said, his voice calm but laced with menace. My heart dropped. I didn't know this man, but he knew me. "Wrong person," I said, trying to sound indifferent. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Don't insult my intelligence. You've made this harder than it needs to be. You've got one last chance to return the money." "I don't have it," I lied, my voice trembling. His expression darkened. "You've got 2 days to get it back. After that? Well, let's just say you won't like the consequences." He stood and left as quickly as he'd appeared, leaving me frozen in the booth. My appetite was gone. 2 days. They weren't going to stop, and now I had a deadline. I spent the next 24 hours trying to think of a way out. The money was my lifeline, but holding on to it felt like clutching a ticking time bomb. I thought about running again, but where would I go? They'd always find me. Then an idea came to me, a dangerous, desperate idea. If they wanted their money so badly, I'd give it to them. On my terms. It was time to turn the tables. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I planned. If they wanted the money, I'd make them work for it, and I'd use the time to get as far away as possible. The first step was reclaiming the duffel bag from the storage locker. Early the next morning, I drove to the train station in Chicago, parking a few blocks away to avoid drawing attention. My hands trembled as I unlocked the storage unit, the sight of the money still sending a rush of adrenaline through me. With the bag slung over my shoulder, I headed to a library across town. Libraries, I'd learned, were one of the few places where you could still use a computer without leaving a trace. From there, I set up a burner email account and sent a message to the man who'd confronted me at the diner. His contact info was scrawled on a card he'd slipped into my hand before he left. The email was simple. If you want your money, meet me at the parking lot on 8th and Wabash at midnight. Come alone, no tricks, it was a bluff, of course. I had no intention of showing up, but I needed them distracted. By the time I hit send, I was already heading to the next part of my plan. At a hardware store, I bought a cheap prepaid phone, duct tape, and an assortment of basic tools. By evening, I was parked in an abandoned industrial area on the edge of town. Using the tools, I broke into an old storage shed and stashed the duffel bag inside. It wasn't perfect, but it was far enough off the grid to buy me time. Then I prepared the bait. From the cash I'd withdrawn earlier, I packed a second bag with a fraction of the money, just enough to make it seem like the real deal. I left it in the parking lot at 8th and Wabash, tucking the burner phone inside with one of its many duplicate keys. When midnight came, I wasn't there to see what happened. I was parked miles away, sitting in another dingy motel room, waiting for the phone to buzz. It didn't take long. "You think this is a game?" the text read. "You're going to regret this." I smiled grimly. Let them regret it. I wasn't about to hand over the money or myself on a silver platter. The next day, things escalated. As I drove through a quiet residential street, a black SUV roared up behind me, tailing me dangerously close. My pulse spiked as I made a sharp turn, then another, weaving through side streets. No matter how many corners I took, they stayed right on my bumper. In a panic, I sped into a crowded shopping plaza and jumped out of the car, leaving it running. I darted through the crowd, weaving between people, my heart pounding in my chest. I made it into a department store and slipped into the dressing rooms, crouching behind the curtains. Minutes passed, and no one came after me. When I finally peeked out, the SUV was gone. That night, another text came through. "Tick-tock, Emily, time's running out." I was running out of options. They were closing in, and I couldn't keep running forever. Then it hit me. There was one place I could go, one place where they wouldn't dare follow, the police. But if I went to the cops, I'd lose everything: the money, my freedom, my chance at a new life. I stared at the phone, weighing my options. Was the money worth risking my life for? I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing: I was running out of time. The decision haunted me all night. Turning the money over to the police would mean giving up the life I'd barely begun to taste. But keeping it meant I'd be looking over my shoulder forever. The clock was ticking, and I knew I couldn't delay any longer. By morning, I made up my mind. I wasn't handing over the money, at least not yet. If I was going down, I was going down on my terms. The first step was drawing them out. I used the burner phone to send another email to the man from the diner. "I'm ready to make a deal. Tonight, 10 p.m. Pier 31. You get your money, and I disappear. No cops, no games?" Pier 31 was an abandoned shipping dock, a perfect place for an exchange or an ambush. I knew they wouldn't come alone, and neither would I. That evening, I arrived early, hiding in the shadows with the duffel bag beside me. I'd chosen my position carefully, overlooking the pier from a rusted catwalk. It gave me a clear view of the area while keeping me out of sight. At exactly 10 p.m. the black SUV rolled up. Two men stepped out. One was the man from the diner, the other a towering brute with a shaved head and a menacing glare. "Emily," the diner man called out, his voice echoing across the empty dock. "We know you're here. Let's end this." I stayed silent, watching as they scanned the area. The duffel bag was in plain sight, sitting on the ground in the middle of the pier. The brute moved to pick it up, but the diner man stopped him. "Wait. It's too easy. Smart. Too bad it wouldn't help them." With trembling hands, I pulled out the second burner phone and hit the button I'd programmed earlier. The duffel bag exploded, not a real explosion, but a brilliant burst of fireworks I'd stuffed inside. Sparks flew, and the men ducked, shouting in surprise. I seized the moment. From the catwalk, I shouted, "This is the last warning. Back off, or next time it won't be fireworks." The diner man looked up, his face twisted in anger. "You're making a big mistake, Emily. I'm done playing games," I yelled. "You follow me again, and I'll burn every last cent. Tell your boss that." For a moment, they hesitated. Then, without a word, they turned and got back in the SUV. The message had been sent. I didn't wait around to see if they'd return. I grabbed the real duffel bag from its hiding spot under the catwalk and slipped away into the night. My heart raced as I drove out of town, the adrenaline making my hands shake on the wheel. I didn't know if my stunt had worked or if they'd be back. But for now, I had a head start, and I wasn't about to waste it. 2 weeks later, I was in a small beachside town in Oregon, living under a new name. The money had bought me freedom, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. Paranoia lingered, and I always kept a packed bag by the door ready to run. Some nights I wondered if I'd made the right choice. The money had given me a new life, but it had also painted a target on my back. But as I sat on the quiet beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, I couldn't help but think that, for now, I was free. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth the risk, or so I thought. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos. Hello my dear viewers, I would like to thank you for watching the video, and I wanted to say subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be very grateful and you will not miss new videos. Enjoy the video. You never expect to find something sinister in your grandmother's attic. Especially not when you're just helping clean out her house after she moves to a retirement community in Florida. But that's exactly what happened to me last October. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and until that day my life was perfectly ordinary. I was working as a high school English teacher in a small town in Massachusetts, grading papers and dealing with teenage drama. My grandmother Helen had lived in the same Victorian house for over 50 years, and it was filled with decades of memories and apparently secrets. The attic was dusty and cramped, filled with boxes of old photographs, holiday decorations, and furniture covered in yellowed sheets. The autumn sun filtered through a small round window, creating long shadows that danced across the wooden floorboards. I was going through the last corner when I found it, a polished mahogany box with intricate carvings about the size of a shoebox. At first, I thought it was just another jewelry box like the dozens of others I'd already packed away. But this one had no keyhole, no obvious way to open it. Instead, it had a series of small wooden panels that could be slid around, like one of those puzzle boxes you see in escape rooms. I've always loved puzzles, so I sat down cross-legged on the floor and started working on it. It took me almost an hour, but finally I heard a satisfying click. Inside, I found a stack of letters, all addressed to my grandmother, dating back to 1962. They were from someone named James Cooper, a name I'd never heard before. The first letter started with "My dearest Helen" and ended with "Forever yours," but it was the contents that made my blood run cold. James wrote about a plan that had worked perfectly and how no one would ever find out what they did. He mentioned something about $50,000, a fortune in 1962, and a man named Richard Baker who had disappeared without a trace. I knew I should have put the letters back. I knew I should have called my mom or asked my grandmother about them. But something compelled me to keep reading. That's when I noticed the newspaper clipping tucked between the pages. The headline read, "Local bank manager Richard Baker missing, police suspect foul play." My sweet, cookie-baking grandmother who taught Sunday school, what had she been involved in? And more importantly, what was I supposed to do with this information now? Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my grandmother. "Sarah, dear, did you find a mahogany box in the attic? The one with the sliding panels. I need you to bring it to me in Florida. Right away. Don't open it, please." I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. What would you do? Pretend you never found it? Turn it over to the police? Or drive to Florida and face your grandmother, who might not be the person you thought she was at all? I wish I could say I made the moral choice, marched straight to the police station or confronted my grandmother immediately. Instead, I did what any reasonable person would do. I panicked. I carefully repacked the letters, closed the puzzle box, and shoved it into my backpack. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept reading and rereading the letters until the words blurred together. There were 12 in total, spanning from February to December 1962. Each one painted a clearer picture of whatever scheme James and my grandmother had orchestrated. They mentioned meetups at a place called Charlie's Diner, discussions about bank records, and something about a boat on Lake Winnipesaukee. The most disturbing letter was dated October 15, 1962. James wrote, "Helen, my love, you were brilliant today. The way you handled Margaret Baker's questions at the funeral, Oscar-worthy performance. No one suspects a thing. Richard's grieving widow will get the insurance money next week, and then we'll be home free." I googled Richard Baker death 1960 to Massachusetts and fell down a rabbit hole. Richard Baker had been the manager of First National Bank in our town. He disappeared after closing time on a Friday, leaving behind his wife Margaret and their 2 young children. The case went cold after a few months. Some thought he'd embezzled money and fled to South America. Others suspected foul play. Here's the thing that really got to me. My grandmother had been a teller at that same bank. I called in sick to work the next day and started the drive to Florida. 20 hours on the road gave me plenty of time to think. Was my grandmother a murderer? A thief? Both. And who was James Cooper? I tried searching his name too, but with no luck. About halfway through Georgia, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello," my voice cracked. "Sarah Mitchell." The man's voice was elderly but strong. "You don't know me, but I knew your grandmother. And James Cooper, I worked at First National back in '62. My hands started shaking so badly I had to pull over. "How did you get this number?" I asked. "Helen called me," he said. "Told me you found the box. Listen carefully. You're in danger." They never found Richard's body because the line went dead. I tried calling back. Nothing, just voicemail. That's when I noticed the black SUV that had been behind me for the last 100 miles. The driver was wearing a hat and sunglasses despite it being nearly sunset. My grandmother's retirement community was still for hours away. But suddenly, I wasn't sure I wanted to get there at all. The thing about being followed on a highway is that you can never be completely sure. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe that black SUV really did happen to be going the same direction for 200 miles. Maybe, but when I pulled into a gas station just outside of Jacksonville and the SUV pulled in too, I knew it wasn't paranoia. I pretended to browse the snack aisle while watching the driver through the security mirror. He was tall, probably in his 60s, with silver hair peeking out from under his baseball cap. Something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. He bought a coffee and returned to his vehicle without looking at me once. That's when I remembered there was a photo in one of the letters. A group shot outside the bank dated summer 1962. James Cooper had his arm around my grandmother, and next to them was a young man with dark hair and sharp features. The same face, just 50 years younger. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Don't go to Sunshine Palms. Helen isn't there. Meet me at the Ocean View Cafe on A1A. 1 hour? Come alone, bring the box." Sunshine Palms was my grandmother's retirement community. With shaking hands, I called them. "Hi, I'm trying to reach Helen Mitchell in Unit 247. "Oh, I'm sorry," the receptionist said. "Mrs. Mitchell checked out 3 days ago. Her daughter picked her up. My mother was in Europe. I'd just spoken to her yesterday. I had two choices, meet the mysterious texter at the cafe or call the police, but what would I tell them? That my grandmother might have been involved in a 60-year-old crime. That I found some letters suggesting she wasn't exactly who she claimed to be. That someone who might or might not be following me wanted to meet. I drove to the cafe but parked across the street, watching. It was a small beachside place, practically empty except for an elderly couple and a woman sitting alone by the window. She looked to be in her 70s, elegant in a blue dress, her silver hair perfectly styled. As I watched, she lifted her coffee cup with trembling hands. My phone buzzed again. "I see you, Sarah. I'm Margaret Baker." Yes, that Margaret Baker. Richard was my husband. I've been waiting a very long time to talk to someone about what really happened that night. Your grandmother isn't the only one with secrets. The woman in blue raised her hand and waved directly at me. I reached for the mahogany box in my backpack. The same black SUV was still idling down the street, but now I could see the driver was on the phone. Whatever truth lay behind Richard Baker's disappearance, I was about to learn it. I just hoped I wouldn't disappear too. The bell above the cafe door chimed as I walked in. Margaret Baker's eyes never left me as I approached her table, the mahogany box clutched against my chest like a shield. "You look just like her," Margaret said softly. "Helen, I mean, back in 1962. I slid into the booth across from her. Up close, I could see the years hadn't been kind to Margaret Baker. Deep lines marked her face, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "I know what you think happened," she said, stirring her coffee. "That Helen and James murdered Richard for the money. That's what everyone thought, but the truth... Oh, the truth is much stranger." She reached into her purse and pulled out a leather wallet. Inside was a police badge. "Richard Baker wasn't just a bank manager," she said. "He was an undercover FBI agent investigating a counterfeiting ring. James Cooper was his partner." My head spun. What about my grandmother? Helen was their inside source. She discovered the counterfeiting operation was being run by the bank president himself, Charles Montgomery. But something went wrong. The night Richard disappeared, he called me in a panic. Said he had proof Montgomery was planning to kill him. He was supposed to meet Helen at Charlie's diner to get final evidence, but he never made it. I pulled out the letters. Then why did James write these? About the plan working perfectly. Margaret's eyes widened. Those aren't from James. Look at the handwriting closely. Compare it to the signature. Someone was pretending to be him. She was right. The handwriting in the body of the letters was slightly different from the signatures. "Charles Montgomery wrote those letters," Margaret said. "He planted them in that box for someone to find eventually. He wanted to frame Helen and James if the truth ever came out, but here's what he didn't know." The cafe door chimed again. The man from the SUV walked in. Margaret smiled, right on time. The man removed his hat and sunglasses. He had to be in his 80s, but I recognized him from the old photo, James Cooper. "Sorry about the cloak and dagger routine," he said, sitting down next to Margaret. "But we had to make sure you weren't being followed. Charles Montgomery's son David is now the bank president. He's been watching Helen for years, afraid she'd eventually tell someone what she knew." "Where is she?" I demanded. The retirement home said. "She's safe," James assured me. "We moved her when we realized David Montgomery was closing in. But she wanted you to find that box. She knew you'd figure it out." Margaret reached across the table and took my hand. "Richard's body was found last month. A construction crew dug it up behind the old bank building. And we finally have proof of who killed him. But we need your help, Sarah. Those letters you found. They're not just letters. Your grandmother hid something inside them. Something that will prove what really happened that night." I opened the box and pulled out the letters again. In the fading sunlight coming through the cafe window, I noticed something odd about the paper. Holding the letters up to the light, I could see tiny pinpricks through certain letters. My grandmother had used a pin to create a code, dots under specific characters that, when connected, formed words. A message hidden in plain sight all these years. She was a puzzle lover too, James said, smiling. Helen knew these letters might be found someday, so she left proof that couldn't be destroyed. Working together, we decoded the message. CM darkroom behind Vault 10 PMOCT 12RB shot twice J's saw all. Charles Montgomery, Margaret whispered. The bank's darkroom, where they processed security camera film. That's where Richard was killed. James nodded grimly. JS was Janet Smith, the cleaning lady. She witnessed everything but was too scared to come forward. She left town the next day. Charles Montgomery made sure she disappeared too. But why? I asked. What was worth killing for? Margaret pulled out an old photograph. It showed Charles Montgomery standing proudly in front of the bank. "Look at the date," she said. October 11th, 1962, the day before Richard was murdered. In the photo, Montgomery was wearing an expensive watch and ring. "Now look at this one." She produced another photo, dated October 13th. Same pose, same smile, but different jewelry. Richard discovered Montgomery wasn't just counterfeiting money, James explained. He was replacing real diamonds and jewelry from safety deposit boxes with fakes. Millions worth. He'd been doing it for years. The counterfeiting operation was just a cover for an even bigger scheme. When Richard confronted him that night, Margaret continued, "Montgomery killed him." But Janet Smith saw everything through the darkroom door's window. Your grandmother knew too. She'd seen Montgomery coming out of the vault at odd hours, noticed the discrepancies in the ledgers. But without proof, I looked at the box again. The intricate sliding panels suddenly made sense. "There's more to this box, isn't there?" James reached over and pressed a hidden catch I hadn't noticed. The bottom panel slid away, revealing a false bottom. Inside lay a small notebook, its pages yellow with age. "Janet Smith's diary," Margaret said. "She gave it to Helen before she fled. Your grandmother kept it safe all these years, waiting for the right time. And now, David Montgomery was arrested this morning," James announced. "The FBI found the original jewelry in a storage unit rented under his father's name. He'd been selling off pieces slowly for years. Your grandmother's evidence was the final piece they needed." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Turn on the news, sweetheart. Love, Grandma." Breaking news: 60-year-old bank heist solved. Father-son criminal enterprise exposed. "Is she really safe?" I asked. James smiled. "Why don't you ask her yourself?" The cafe door opened one last time. My grandmother walked in, looking exactly like she always did. Floral dress, pearl necklace, gentle smile. But now I saw something else in her eyes: strength, determination. The look of a woman who had carried a secret for 60 years to make sure justice would finally be served. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner, Sarah," she said, hugging me tight. "But some puzzles take time to solve, and you solved this one perfectly." As we sat there in that beachside cafe, my grandmother told me the full story. Not just about the crime, but about courage, patience, and the power of truth. Sometimes the biggest mysteries aren't about what we find. They're about who we discover people really are. The mahogany puzzle box sits on my desk now. A reminder that every family has its secrets, but some secrets are worth keeping until the right moment comes to let them out. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos.